Hello everyone, welcome to a brand new video on the vertical conjugate gaze pathway. So we are going to be discussing in this particular video saccades and pursuit both. But let's get started and see what the content that we're going to discuss is. First off, we wanted to simply answer what is a conjugate gaze. We need to understand that before we really understand anything. I do want to talk about the different types of conjugate gaze. There are two, the saccades and the pursuits. We want to talk about the two types of control, volitional and visually reflexive. Then we're going to talk about the three control centers, the supranuclear, internuclear, and infranuclear control centers. And then we're going to look at how we actually cause an upward and a downward gaze by drawing out the neural pathway together. So what we want to do is just really start off with answering the simple question is, what is a conjugate gaze? Now, in a previous video, I did a conjugate gaze where I discussed the vestibulo-ocular reflex. So that is a type of conjugate gaze, but I didn't really go into conjugate gazes because I was saving it for this video. And so let's say I have two eyes. Now, what we should have happen is if I have a patient and I ask the patient, you need to look upwards, and they start to look up, then what should happen is that both eyes look up in the same direction at the same speed so that one eye isn't traveling faster than the other eye so that there's not an imbalance in movement. And if I ask them to look downwards, we should see both eyes move downwards at the same direction, same speed. If for some reason they can't move both eyes at the same time or can't move both eyes at the same speed, we have a lack of a conjugate gaze. A conjugate gaze is looking up and down smoothly in the same time and the same speed. Okay, so vertical is up and down. So up and down gazes would be considered both components of the vertical conjugate gaze, which will require more complex muscle anatomy to understand. But most of you probably have already learned that. Now, let's talk about the types. Now, when we talk about types, one of the things we may know is that there are some types of gazes, if you guys have already learned this in some of your courses. And we have a thing referred to as a saccade. And a saccade or saccade is a very rapid movement. Okay, these would be considered to be a rapid up or down movement. Since we are talking about vertical conjugate gaze, a very rapid conjugate gaze is called a saccade or saccade, whereas the second one that we would talk about is called a pursuit. And a pursuit would be much more slow at looking up or down. So you could have a very rapid look up because you heard a loud noise. Maybe you heard something above you make a noise, so you look up very quickly. But maybe with a pursuit, your balloon, you let go of a balloon and it starts to float up slowly, so you watch it slowly go up. So with a saccade, something very rapid to look up very quickly, pursuit very slowly. But these things help me keep my eyes on a fixed target. If something is moving, I can follow it upwards. For example, a doctor who is holding a flashlight during neurological examination can do that. They can travel this pen upwards and see if you can track it conjugately. Now, we said there are two kinds of stimuli, one might say, two types of gazes. The different gazes can be controlled differently. There's different ways to control gazes. Now, with control, we would say control stimuli, things that can initiate this, things that cause it. It can be either what we'd say volitional. And when I say it's volitional, I am going to say it's voluntary. I am under control of that. I made it happen. So to do that, we're going to need a part of the frontal lobe here. We're going to need something. One of these things you're going to need is the frontal eye field. And specifically, we are looking at area 8. So we need voluntary control of muscle. So that is one type of control. Second type of control we would talk about is visually reflexive. When I say something is visually reflexive, so what I am talking about is, so reflexes, we know if you're reflexive, this is non-voluntary. But we must first use the occipital lobe, because remember, occipital lobe contains the optic area of the brain that perceives consciously visual stimuli. We also must use the accessory eye field, and I'm just going to write accessory eye field as AEF, and that's on the parietal lobe as well. Now, the parietal lobe and occipital lobe will send information contralaterally, but it's using any kind of visual information, any kind of visual input. Okay, so visual info. So what I'm saying is, like, a bug is flying above your head and you look up to see it. Because you're like, oh, well, that's something I probably need to look at. And that might be a bee that might sting me. Where volitional is voluntary. Okay, I'm looking up because I decided to look up because I wanted to look up at the clouds or something like that. Now, a little bit more interesting to talk about, I think, sometimes, is these three little brain regions that can control conjugate gaze, the centers, the three control centers that we have. Now, when I talk about the three control centers, what I'm going to do is I am going to list them and talk about them to some detail here. But what I also kind of want to do is a very kind of crude drawing of it, where I might discuss some very basics of the brain here, and I may discuss some things dealing with that. It is some things I sometimes will talk about. One of the things I like to do when I discuss it is kind of show generally where you might be able to find some of these things, where they might be located to some degree, dealing with them. And what we want to make sure we understand is, with all of these pursuits and visually reflexive control centers, you can be dealing with parts of the brain, like I said, that are found in different regions, whether they are in the brain stem or the brain itself, up in the cerebral cortex. So what I want to talk about is these kind of upward control centers, these upward and downward visually centers. So the conjugate gaze, we can have our very first one we want to talk about is called the supranuclear. Now, the supranuclear pathway here is, when we say supra, we are saying it's above the nuclei that are going to be in the midbrain, in the brainstem area. So supranuclear. Now, any area that is cerebral would be referred to as a supranuclear pathway area. Now, this is the cerebrum. These things are found in our cerebrum. They are going to be specifically, one of them is the frontal eye field. Specifically important is area 8. The parietal eye field, which is also we call that the accessory eye field, which actually is 3 areas. There will be areas 17, 18, and 19. And then, if you want smooth pursuits as well, you need the visual cortex. So let me erase that because it's already getting to be messy. And so our visual cortex as well. So our visual cortex, this allowed us to give us the really fine things. This gives us very smooth pursuits that we might want to have is our visual cortex that's located back here in the occipital lobe. So you have your different areas. The supranuclear are everything above the brain stem. Our second important center is called internuclear. Now, here it means internuclear is going to be dealing with all the different nuclei that might be involved in brain movements here, where these centers send commands to and from each other between nuclei of the brainstem, mostly found in the midbrain, or midbrain nuclei. So the different nuclei. Now, there will be a lot of them we're going to talk about. I am going to use for ease is just to add their different abbreviations. The first one I want to talk about is called the rostral median longitudinal fasciculus. So the RIMLF. The next one we want to talk about, which is, these are all the really big ones that you would need to know, is the interstitial nucleus of Cajal. Then the other two should be easier to kind of know about. There is CN3, the oculomotor nucleus, and CN4, the trochlear nerve nucleus. These are two nuclei of the brain that we should know are involved. Now, everything out of here, when that information leaves these centers and we go out, this will involve the nerves and the muscles of the eyeball itself. These areas would be called the infranuclear parts. These would be the infranuclear components. Infra, below, infranuclear, below the nucleus. So this will involve your cranial nerves. I'm just going to say CN3 and 4, and then the eye muscles that we want to know. And that'll be the eye muscles that we're going to talk about. Let me clean that up because it gets very hard to write on the app that I use to make these videos sometimes. And I'm just going to say this is involved with cranial nerve, number 3 and 4, which we know 3 and 4 is nucleus. And then we're going to deal with the muscles, the eye muscles. And I'll talk about the specific ones here in just a minute. Now, abbreviation-wise, I want to talk about there's the superior rectus, the superior oblique, the inferior rectus, and the inferior oblique muscles to cause vertical movements. So you need the two superior rectus, superior rectus and superior oblique, and the two inferior muscles, inferior rectus and inferior oblique, to be part of the infranuclear pathway part. Now, these components all have to come together and work in a pathway. So that's what we're going to draw out. Now, if you go into the description of this video, you will find this diagram here as a photograph that you can link to it to a Dropbox that you could download this and draw with me. So if you are actually watching this on YouTube, you can pause it and watch it because, but these videos that I do, I always like to draw things out. I believe the best way to learn neurological pathways is to draw them. Now, what we are basically going to start with is one side, and I'm always going to do this one side here, and I want to just make sure that we kind of illuminate these different things. So we're going to look at how we look up an upward saccade or upward conjugate movement. Now, what I want to do is, again, we said that the nuclei that were important was the rostral medial longitudinal fasciculus, the interstitial nucleus of Cajal, cranial nerve 3 and 4 nuclei. Now, what we're going to do is let's go ahead, since we have these located, we have all the internuclear components. There's only one part that I don't necessarily have labeled here, and that's this area right here, the posterior commissure of the brain. And that is an area that I do want to talk about, the posterior commissure of the brain. And I'm not going to leave it labeled, but we'll talk about the posterior commissure of the brain. Now, I am going to go move to a finer tip on my pen, but we're going to start off by first drawing the muscles that we need to make sure that we understand. Now, I will do a separate video on the eye movements, which I have ready to go as well, but I am going to be doing something else right now. But I want to go ahead and put on the superior rectus and the inferior oblique muscles and put those on here. Now we want to look up. Now these will be the two muscles that help us look up. This is the infranuclear component. Now let's do the internuclear component. Now with this, you guys should know we're not dealing with the superior oblique muscle here, so cranial nerve number 4 nucleus will not be involved in this particular pathway for upward, okay? But this will be upward gaze, okay? Upward gaze. So let's see how this happens. First off, we will have neurons that will be in the, we're going to start off in the rostral median longitudinal fasciculus. So we're going to actually put 3 distinctive neurons here. Now, because this is a nucleus, they will contain neuron cell bodies. Now, I am going to do 2 things here. Now, one thing I want to do is show that there will be 2 kinds of crossing over of information, and we're not going to pick this one up any further, okay? Think of this as kind of a backup plan. Then we're going to take one and we're going to go to the cranial nerve 3 nucleus. And then we're going to take the last one here and we're going to go to the interstitial nucleus of Cajal. Now, the interstitial nucleus of Cajal has a very interesting function. If we take a neuron from there, we would take this neuron, go back to the posterior commissure, cross over, and bring it to the opposite side, the contralateral cranial nerve number 3 nucleus, oculomotor nerve nucleus, okay? Now, what we're then going to do is remember, for neurological control, you have 3 nerves that control muscles in the eyeball. We have cranial nerve number 3, number 4, and number 6. Now, 4 controls the superior oblique. Number 6 controls lateral rectus. The rest are under control of cranial nerve number 3, oculomotor nerve. So this is going to control these 2 muscles. So what we're going to do is we're going to leave this nucleus. So again, collection of neuron cell bodies. And we are going to control both muscles with this single nerve. Okay. And I always have troubles when there we go. When I'm trying to do this, when I draw, it's like, oh, okay, I see what I was doing. All right. And we're going to control both of those. And these are going to pull. And when they do, they will lift the eye upward, and this will cause an upward saccade. So, or upward pursuit. These are the ways we're going to make our movements. Now, what I want you guys to kind of pay attention to here is starting off at the rostral median longitudinal fasciculus, coming out with 3 nerves, crossing over. on two different ways to get to the other side, to have some control as well. Bilateral control, as you can see, would happen. What happens here happens on the other side as well. And I'm only doing one side to make this a little bit easier to see. Now, if I wanted to look at the other pathway, if I wanted to look down, okay, if I want to look down, and that's going to be the goal in this next one, is to look down. To do that, we're going to need our infranuclear muscles. We're going to need our inferior rectus muscle to help me look down. And we're going to need our superior oblique muscle to help me look down as well. Okay? So what we want to do here, now this is a little bit more simple. With this one is a little bit more simple in some respects. So we're going to start off here at our rostral median longitudinal fasciculus, and we're only going to have two cell bodies. So what we're going to do is one cell body, one neuron is going to leave and go to cranial nerve number 3 nucleus, because our superior, our inferior rectus is going to be controlled by it. But we also must take a collateral branch and come out to CN4 to control our superior oblique muscle, because the superior oblique is controlled by the 4th cranial nerve. Then we're going to take this one here to the interstitial nucleus, interstitial nucleus of Cajal, and we're going to take the neuron from there, like we always will do when we go to that nucleus, is cross over with the posterior commissure, and we're going to go all the way down to CN3's nucleus contralaterally. And we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to use a collateral branch to go to CN3, and then we're going to take some of those out. So what are we going to do? Let's start with CN3. Now, CN3 nucleus is going to control the inferior rectus. So let's take a neuron, and we're going to go to the inferior rectus here. I don't know why that just happened. There we go. And the same thing here to the inferior rectus. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around to control, and I don't have to do it as extensively as I did there. That's not necessarily needed to be that extensive, but what I'm going to do from here is come around to control the superior oblique from the trochlear nerve. So what you have here, of course, is CN4, and what you have here is CN3. So it's a little bit more complicated because it does involve two nerves, but it's actually a little bit more simple because you have less coming out of the rostral medial longitudinal fasciculus, median longitudinal fasciculus, sorry. So these are the pathways, and this is how these would work to make movements. Now, what I'm going to do in another video is really kind of go into more on eye movement and show how this works. But I've really been looking forward to making this video for some time. I've always enjoyed drawing neural pathways. I think it's really the best way to learn and understand them. So print out these diagrams, draw it along with me, and do it till you understand it. It's the best way to grasp a concept this complex. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope you find these videos helpful. Please let me know what you'd like to see in future videos, but as always, just thank you for watching, and we will see you guys in the next one. Thank you. Bye.